Good afternoon, folks. Give me just a moment here.
Managing a bread oven was a skilled business with a perpetual risk of flames getting out of hand. Remember, the Great Fire of London famously began with a blaze starting at a
Technical difficulties.
So, we bought our bread, butter, and cheese. But I think I'm going to be
There we go. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I am your host, Tiffany Daniels, and we're getting back to our Medicaid series, or to properly term it, what we are looking at in regards to the looming tax cuts, how it's going to affect Medicaid, and exactly what does that mean? What does it actually look like? Because most folks right off the street aren't really well aware of everything that Medicaid funding covers. What we're going to be starting to look at today is we're going to be getting into the Medicaid wait lists. Specifically for this one, we are talking about community-based services, long-term services, and supports. Now, the look that we're going to be going over here comes back from last year, October the 31st, 2024. So this is relatively new, folks. This was before Trump got into office. And I wanted to cover it because the wait lists have been a problem for almost 25 years now. So we're going to be reading through all of that. But first, real quick, folks, if you're unfamiliar with this channel, of course, I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We cover things that have to do specifically with disability rights, neurodivergent rights, and on occasions we veer in left field and I spout off about my fandom areas like Godzilla and Marvel that I like to babble about every so often. That being said, in regards to this channel, we do have it as marked not for children because profanity is used and there's some very dark topics that we covered on this channel. So we do recommend, if your child's 16 and younger, that parental supervision please be used here, okay? Particularly because, especially when we talk about places like JRC, it goes to some pretty dark areas. It does involve some graphic descriptions of horrendous things. Okay. Sorry, that was kind of a bunch of word vomit. I have a little bit of trouble with some of these series that derive off of the main videos going after the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center, so just please bear with me, folks. I do not know how to edit this to save my soul. So, we've gone back to the KFF, and just like with all the other videos, you are going to see a link to this particular article right there in the description box, along with the other links. I encourage you to go there, and I also encourage you to use the link in there for the ARC of the United States. There they provide a lot of letter templates, email templates, even phone scripts to get a hold of your representatives to tell them hands off of Medicaid. It's a fantastic resource. If you want to get in and join the fight, now is the time. We are in do or die, now or never, when it comes to those of us with developmental disabilities. So, if you want to jump in with us, that is one of the best resources out there. Alright? Okay, so a look at the waiting list for Medicaid home and community-based services from 2016 to 2024. Now, this doesn't just cover things like we've gone over in regards to direct care staff. Some of those community-based services that get Medicaid funding is vocational rehabilitation, job coaching, there's a, yeah, you see where I'm going, right? Voc Rehab gets some of that funding to continue with their programs to assist in getting those of us with developmental disabilities into community-based and supported employment. Uh, Assists in taking care with direct care staff in regards to community integrators. It covers more direct where there's more hands-on because the consumer being served is somebody that's a bit more medical fragile. It assists in covering costs for assistive devices. Like, for example, with those us autistic folks, it helps to cover like different little pads you can use for our verbal compadres to help them be able to better communicate. But anyways, let me stop babbling at you. Let's get into it. Medicaid is the primary payer for long-term services and supports in the United States. It pays for more than 2/3 of the LTSS delivered in home and community-based settings, or HCBS. Remember, we've gone over this before when I told you that Medicaid's the gateway. You don't get into Medicaid, you don't get into these other services that can assist you, such as ARC, Easter Seals, Nova, and Judify. So I'm very glad they're coming at you straight out the gate. I like it. I like it a lot. Most HCBS are optional for states to provide and are offered through waivers, which allow states to offer a wide range of benefits and to choose and limit the number of people who receive services. The only HCBS that states are required to cover is home health, but states may choose to cover personal care and other services, such as private duty nursing through the Medicaid state plan. This also covers direct care support. It covers job support and developing job skills. It covers things that have to do like the program I got involved with my last 2 years in high school, where we can start working towards obtaining an associate's degree in whatever a local college would be, willing to get you in at. That's how I got my graphic arts degree. It's a lot of areas. It's so many areas that if I were to draw up a list, we would be here probably till 3 a.m. in the morning. So, let me go ahead and continue here. States use HCBS waivers to offer expanded personal care benefits or to provide additional services such as adult daycare. We call them day centers. ARC has one. Well, they have actually got a couple of them here in town. I believe Judivine does too. Definitely know Easter Seals does. I also know some of that funding goes towards the sheltered workshops. I am not a fan. I think sheltered workshops need to pay the folks that work for them a living wage. But that's its own topic, and we've already done a series on that previously. So let me go ahead and continue here. States use HCBS waivers to offer, well, we went over that, I read that, supported employment and non-medical transportation. So, in regards to my community integrators, like when they would go and take me out into town to assist me in getting my groceries, or even the occasional Tiffany got lost inside Barnes & Noble and we may never find her again trips. Things of that nature. Usually it was kind of a reimbursement, which I learned later when I began to work for this very same service system that I had been a consumer of. But yeah, Medicaid also goes towards some of that as well. Let me go ahead and continue here. States also use waivers to provide specialized benefits. that are specific to the population covered, such as providing supported employment only to people under age 65. KFF estimates that 4.5 million Medicaid enrollees use HCBS, and that the number of people using HCBS through the state plan are similar to the numbers using HCBS through waivers. Now, out here in Missouri, I received HCBS through a waiver, and that literally pertained to helping me keep in my assisted living transition age people. Hear what I'm saying here. Do not be weird with me. Where you would go into the apartment, learn the life skills, begin to work out in the community. I was on one of those HCBS waivers to get into my assisted living. It covered my job coaching, me learning job skills, and also it assisted in helping me find job positions out in the community as well, since nobody was going to hire me even with my degree. I'm still salty on it. I got put where I needed to be in this world, and I'm glad it happened, but I'm still salty. It was 2 years of pure, unadulterated hell. Let me go ahead and continue. A state's ability to cap the number of people enrolled in HCBS waivers can result in waiting lists when the number of people seeking services exceeds the number of waiver slots available. This is the situation we have been facing out in Missouri since I was accepted into the service system as a consumer. Wait lists, my Aunt Teresa, my stepdad's sister, waited about 2 years before she was finally granted the waiver to assist her in her home-based costs to help cover transportation when it came to getting appointments and assisting her in regards to her food, getting jobs out in the community, things of that nature. She had to wait 2 years. 2 years. That happened, and we believe we got her in there. That was mid-2021. Mid-2021 when we got her in the apartment, and it took 2 years before she was finally able to get those services, and also get going with her Section 8 housing to where they would pay the larger proportion of her rent because she is disabled and on limited income. These programs, even HUD receives some funding with Medicaid in regards specifically to those folks like my step-aunt and like myself as well. Things you don't necessarily think about when they're talking about Medicaid. So, let's go ahead and continue here. This data note provides new information about waiting lists from KFF's most recent survey of state Medicaid HCBS programs, including a discussion why waiting lists are an incomplete measure of unmet need and why they are not necessarily comparable across states or over time, despite KFF's efforts to obtain as consistent data as possible. Key takeaways include the number of states that maintain wait lists or interest lists for people who would like to receive HCBS has fluctuated little between 2016 and 2024. In most years since 2016, there has been roughly 0.7 million people on waiting lists or interest lists, with a total of over 710,000 in 2024. Most people on waiting lists or interest lists have intellectual or developmental disabilities, and most live in states that do not screen any people for eligibility prior to adding them to waiting lists. Now, that does not happen here. I was not even allowed on any wait list until my Medicaid came through and I had been approved for it at that time. I was extremely lucky for everything to have worked out the way that it did. Not many people are quite as lucky as I got to be. Thank God for that. Well, not their, you know what I mean. Okay, let me go ahead and continue on here. Basically, in regards to getting on a wait list, you have to be approved for Medicaid first, before they will even put you on an HCBS wait list. You don't get approved, you get butt kissed. That's what they're getting to infer there. Most people on waiting lists or interest lists are eligible for personal care provided through states' regular Medicaid programs or for services provided through state specialized plan HCBS benefits. Not the case for Missouri, I'm afraid. Out here, Medicaid has held this. It's not really a monopoly. I don't really have a word to describe it other than Medicaid is the gateway. You don't get approved for Medicaid, you don't get services. Now, there's places like Burl where I do receive assistance by means of my regular psychiatrist, my psychologist, and my neurologist. What I do not get from Burl that I got from places like ARC is that job assistance. That assistance in regards to HUD. Now, Burl has their own transitions program that they have. But even for their roommate kind of apartment complexes that they have out here on Grand Street, you still, just like with ARC, have to actually get approved for Medicaid first. Otherwise, the services that you are limited to are the ones that I have currently. Should I actually need it, I could probably get back to having community integration. I don't need that anymore, obviously. So it's more basic services. I have my neurologist, my psychiatrist, and my psychologist. Anything else in regards to the service system, should I ever need it again, I would have to get approved for regular old Medicaid, because my single payer insurance I am on right now would not cover the types of programs that I am talking about here. Okay, let me go ahead and continue on here. KFF also recently updated the waiting list indicators on state health facts, which show data by state and target population. Waiting lists provide an indication of people who may need services that they are not receiving, but they are an incomplete measure of unmet need because they don't include people with unmet needs in states that do not cover the applicable services. Not all states, through Medicaid, cover the things that we are talking about here, and therefore have no waiting list. Waiting lists reflect populations a state chooses to serve, the services it decides to provide, and resources it commits, and the availability of workers to provide services. One of the major reasons why there's panic here in my state when it comes to Medicaid in regards to the wait lists in particular is every time there is a major cut, eligibility criteria to get into the service system gets redefined and tightened. That means you may have a few individuals that met the criteria and were approved for Medicaid previously that may not be qualified anymore should the cuts go through, and we have to once again restrict even further the eligibility criteria in order to be able to receive Medicaid. It is extremely scary, folks. People are freaked out. Freaked out. Mo DDC has been lobbying hard. No, ARC, I believe they are some of the participants today up in DC with the hands-off protests because of just how many people this could possibly affect, cut off the program because there just isn't enough money to go around. And those are the folks who have already had some Medicaid and some services. There are a few folks who have been on waiting lists for at least a couple of years out here who may get suddenly dropped. Yeah. It's not good, folks. It's not good. Not at all. Let me go ahead and continue here. In addition, state approaches to managing waitlists differ in how they prioritize and screen for eligibility, making comparisons across states difficult. It's because each state has their own eligibility criteria. Hence why I can say, as at least for Missouri, Medicaid is the gateway to services, period. You don't get it, you don't get the additional services. You get the same things you would have access through employers' insurance. States are only able to use wait lists for optional services, so the number of people on waiting lists can increase when states offer a new waiver or make new services available within existing waivers. In these cases, the number of people receiving services increases, but so does the number of people on the waiting list. Finally, although people may wait a long time to receive waiver services, 40 months on an average in 2024, like I said, most people are eligible for other types of HCBS while they wait. Not in the Missouri, they're not. See, this is what I don't like about politics. Everybody makes a base assumption when it comes to all states and just figure that's correct. When in actuality, that is not the case. Where you may have other states that have other options in regards to HCBS, my state out here, Missouri, is not one of those states. Medicaid is the gatekeeper. You don't get past the gatekeeper. You don't get access to those community-based otherwise services, period. Period. And I know my state is by far not the only one that operates like that. That's why I don't like base statements like this, especially when they already know that every state determines its own criteria, which is reevaluated every single time they decide to take another massive cut out of Medicaid. Therefore, Missouri will continue to restrict and restrict and restrict until there's nothing left to restrict if these cuts just keep coming. Let me continue. Even though HCBS waiting lists are an imperfect measure of unmet need, there are no other alternative measures available. Thank you. That was exactly my point. Thank you. Many HCBS programs were enacted or expanded in response to the Olmstead decision, a court ruling that found unjustified institutionalization of people with disabilities is illegal discrimination. That was the culmination of a massive effort that got started into the 1970s to end the institutionalization and abuse of people with disabilities with impunity. A few places, unfortunately, have managed to straggle and stay on because they didn't call themselves institutions, they called themselves residential schools. Everybody knows the primary one I'm thinking of, the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center, for example. If you want to know how evil I think they are, just watch the rest of the videos on my channel. It becomes pretty clear real quick. But let me go ahead and continue here. As 2024 marked the 25th anniversary of Olmsted, waiting lists are sometimes described as contributing the risk of unnecessary institutionalization for people with disabilities, and Democrats and Republicans alike proposed legislation in 2024 to address them. Starting in 2027, states will be required to report the number of people on waiting lists as required under a final rule on access to Medicaid services. Now, I'm getting real nervous on that one, folks, and the reason why is we have a current president with a pathological hatred of the previous president. And a very, very bad tendency to try and undo and reverse every single thing his predecessor has done in alphabetical order. But they were talking about in regards to this legislation that went through last year was spearheaded by the Biden administration. So to say that I am extremely nervous in regards to the fate of that particular legislation would be an understatement. But I am eyeballing it like a hawk. All right, let me go ahead and continue here. How did the number of states with waiting lists change between 2016 and 2024? Between 2016 and 2024, the number of states with waiting lists has fluctuated between 37 and 41, is currently at 40 states. While some Affordable Care Act opponents have cited waiver waiting lists to argue that expanding Medicaid diverts funds from seniors and people with disabilities, how Medicaid is what's providing those services. Funding for seniors usually goes under Medicare. Research shows the ACA Medicaid expansion has led to gains in coverage for people with disabilities and chronic illnesses. That is a fact. That's why there's a whole lot of people here, especially that live within this general area, that are getting real nervous. Both those who use those services and folks who have jobs at places like Mercy, that some of that Medicaid funding is what pays for the medicines. Yeah. Waiting lists for HCBS predate the ACA Medicaid expansion, which became effective in most states in 2014. And both expansion and non-expansion states have waiting lists. Waiver enrollment caps have existed since HCBS waiver authority was added to federal Medicaid law in the early 1980s. That is a fact. All right. We're going to go through box one here. And after do that, we're going to go ahead and pick up with at least some of the rest of this tomorrow. I have a feeling this is going to be a long one for us to go through. So just kind of be patient with me here. All right, box one, changes to KFF survey on waiting lists and interest lists starting in 2023. Starting in 2023, KFF asked states to report the total number of people who were on a waiting list, referral list, interest list, or another term for HCBS, whereas surveys from 2022 and prior years only asked about waiting lists or referral lists. The change reflects the state's increasing use of terms other than waiting lists to keep track of people who have expressed interest in HCBS but are not receiving services. KFF broadened the survey to increase the comparability of data across states. and across years because states were transitioning to different terms. Prior to 2023, some states used terms other than waiting lists to describe their lists and reported data in the KFF survey. But periodically, a state would change its terminology and approach, resulting in what appeared a large fluctuation in the number of people on waiting lists. For example, in 2018, Louisiana had nearly 30,000 people on a waiting list for their intellectual or developmental disability waiver. The state implemented a new system to screen people for urgent HCBS needs. Those that met the criteria for urgent needs were placed immediately in services, and people with less pressing needs were placed on a registry that replaced the older waiting list. By 2020, the waiting list was eliminated. KFF's assessment that a broader survey question could capture data more consistently, providing more meaningful comparison between states. In 2024, there were slightly more people on the interest lists. 356,440 than on the waiting list, 354,299. The use of term interest list has important ramifications for a recent rule on Medicaid access. Although the final rule would only require states to report people if they are on waiting lists, the preamble to rule indicates CMS intent for states to report all types of lists. A small charge to the KFF survey was to ask the states to report the number of people on the waiting list, and at the time the survey was completed rather than in the prior year. In the spring of 2023, KFF asked states to report the number of people on waiting lists in 2022, but also the number of people currently on the list. Starting in 2024, the survey only asked states to report the number of people currently on the list. All right, we're going to go through this little table here, and then we'll go ahead and pick up where we are now tomorrow. So, number of states with waiting lists or interest lists for Medicaid HCBS has been fairly stable since 2016. So let's take a look at the numbers here. 2016, 39 states. 2017, 40. 2018, 41. Looks like we don't have any data for 2019, which is disturbing to me. 2020, 39. 2021, 37. 2022, 38. 2023, 38. And 2024, 40. So these are all those who have wait lists currently right now. There were more changes in waiting lists for specific types of waivers, however. Yes, I was hoping they would get to that. It really does depend upon the waivers because you have different ones for different things. And that can also be varying too depending on the state, particularly when we're talking job programs, what Medicaid covers, what voc rehabs covers through their own funding. It can get kind of confusing. So I'm glad they did go ahead and put that in there. Georgia and Kentucky and West Virginia reported new lists for seniors and adults with physical disabilities, with a combined 2,683 people, and Alaska, Connecticut, South Dakota, and Washington reported new lists for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. IDD with a combined 13,251 people on the lists. New Jersey newly reported a waiting list of nearly 2,700 people for its community care program, which serves people with IDD and is part of the state's larger 1115 waiver. So as you can see, this is the wait list right now. They have been consistent. Now let me say this, consistently bad. Consistently bad across the board. Which really doesn't surprise me all that much, because remember who was president in 2016 and started to really mess with Medicaid. That was also the same time period where we had an F around find out moment with former Governor Eric Greitens. I'm not sorry. And I'm glad I was a part of getting that guy out of here, because he was trying to even take more out of Medicaid, but not just that, he was trying to do it instantly. You won't want to know the level of chaos and horror that would have left in its wake if we had just left that man alone. Sorry, can't do it. Can't do it. But anyways, this gives you a bird's eye view of what we're talking about in regards to waiver waiting lists. Now, this is more of a basic overall. In regards to different states, some of them cover services that others don't. So waiting lists for, let me get very specific here. Like the waivers that help cover things like vocational rehabilitation, that assist and cover things either in getting us into a trade school or part-time college during high school like I did, which is how I was able to graduate and have an associate's at the same time. Thank you, Medicaid. But that was its own waiver, separate. Vocational rehab, job coaching, community-based employment type of activities, supports, had its own waiver. Assisted living places, like the one I was at, that you had to qualify for Section 8 HUD, but some of that had funding specifically for those assisted living places, does come from two places. Now, mine was Medicaid alone, but a lot of these assisted livings, it's not just us with developmental disabilities and people with physical disabilities, it's also a lot of assisted living for our elder folks who come through it by means of Medicare. So, that also has its own waiver list. And I'll be honest, I'm not quite as familiar with Medicare and that funding as I am with Medicaid. We'll go ahead and we'll continue to go through all of that, starting up again tomorrow. For right now, we're going to go ahead and close out. We don't get very many views on this channel. The few we do tend to get removed from time to time. So folks, if you could please, don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe. Please don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time. And as always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea absolutely do hope you have a good one. Before we sign out, yes, I know I have not done a live for a good long minute. The reason is I am up to my elbows in this, folks. Yeah. With interactions with Mo, DDC, with ARC, with People First, with ASAN, and Neuroclastic, and the multiple fronts that all of us are getting hit from. Also with AppSimo and I'll sleep when I'm dead, apparently. I'll sleep when I'm dead. I will try to get a live in at some point. I had no idea after leaving Wayfair that my life was going to become far more hectic than even when I was on the phones. But because somehow we have the madman back in the White House again, such is life, right? Such is life. I'll do the best I can, folks. I really will. But research monkeying, and if there's any of this that can be offset by doing some grant writing, we are looking at multiple avenues, so we'll try, alright? Alright. Again, we do hope you have a good one. Have a great weekend, folks. But bye now. I'll see you all tomorrow.